Hey there, everyone, and welcome back to the next installment in the Aspect of the Week video series. This video is going to give you a few insights about Venus retrograde in Capricorn and a little bit about the longer tour of Venus through Capricorn as a whole. I'm Kelly from Kelly's Astrology, and I'll be your guide through the skies today. Thank you so much for watching. So before I get into all the ins and outs of this Venus retrograde and what you can expect from it, I want to make sure you know about my monthly membership. This is a series of special videos about all the aspects happening each day and each week that is available for members only. If you'd like to join us and sign up to get your own subscription, pop over via the link below to my website where you can become a member and get access to all of those excellent extra weekly, daily astrological insights. So I talk about all kinds of astrological events like the full moon or the sun changing signs or Saturn square Uranus or whatever else is happening. So you'll get tips and insights to help you time your life with astrology. So back to today's video. As many of you probably know, Venus has a retrograde happening very soon, or perhaps by the time you're watching this, happening now. Venus will be retrograde in Capricorn from Sunday, December 19th through to Friday, January 28th. I knew it was January 28th, but I wasn't sure what day of the week that was. So this is a special cycle, lasts about 6 weeks, where Venus is reversing or moving backwards through a particular part of the sky. And what that does is create a change in quality of all kinds of Venus things. So we typically experience this most obviously in our relationships. Some people sort of immediately worry about romantic relationships in this cycle, but it's more than just love, dating, or romantic relationships. It's all kinds of partnerships. So professional partnerships, family relationships. Venus is about that kind of interpersonal experience, what goes on when you interact with another human. And when Venus is retrograde, we have an opportunity to reflect on and perhaps rewrite or reset the rules of relating. So there's a lot we can do while Venus is retrograde. Now, this Venus retrograde is happening in the sign of Capricorn. Venus does go retrograde every 18 months, but each 18 months she's in one of just 5 signs through the zodiac. Venus's retrogrades are known to create this very special 5-pointed star. And so over the course of our lifetimes, we tend to experience Venus retrogrades in just one of 5 different zodiac signs, Capricorn being one of them. And what that means is that every 8 years, Venus comes back and is retrograde in Capricorn again. So one of your first tips about working with the current Venus retrograde cycle is to think back to what was going on in your life in December 2013 and January 2014, which was the previous time that Venus was retrograde in Capricorn. So some of the topics or themes or issues that you were navigating or exploring back in December 2013, January 2014, they are being reactivated, or Venus, perhaps more accurately, is reactivating that part of the zodiac, that part of our birth charts, and that part of our life again. So there is an 8-year cycle to Venus retrograde. And so it's helpful to think back to 8 years previously, how much you've grown, how much you've changed, and what you might want to do differently based on the wisdom and experiences you've had in this past 8 years. Venus is stationing retrograde, beginning her backwards journey at 26 degrees Capricorn. So she's going to retrograde back from 26 Capricorn to 11 degrees of Capricorn. And if you're working with your birth chart in the whole sign format, that's going to be totally enclosed in one particular birth chart or one particular house in your chart. And one of the simplest ways to work with Venus retrograde is to focus on reviewing, reassessing, and restructuring the topics of the Capricorn part of your chart. The other two house areas in your personal birth chart that are likely to get pulled into or also go through a reworking process while Venus is retrograde is the house ruled by Taurus and the house ruled by Libra. Of course, the two houses that would have Venus as the ruler or guiding planet. So for most of us, a Venus retrograde like this can affect three different houses or parts of our chart. The house in which the retrograde's occurring, which in this case is Capricorn, also the two houses ruled by Venus, because they are always affected by what's going on with Venus in the sky. Because it's a retrograde, all the classic things, review, redo, reassess, restructure, revision, these are all appropriate strategies or tips around that Capricorn part of your chart. I know many of you will be wondering, in addition to, what does it mean when Venus is retrograde and how can we work with it? Many of you are probably wondering how important it actually is for you personally. So retrogrades like Venus retrograde or Mercury retrograde or even Mars retrograde, they're not equally important for all of us. So there are some ways to figure out whether this Venus retrograde will have a bigger impact or a more dramatic effect on your personal birth chart. And some of the factors, like the checklist to look at, would be first question to look at is, do you have any important planets or angles in your birth chart in that 11 to 26 degree span inside Capricorn? So if your midheaven was in there, or your moon, which was your sect light, or maybe you have a stellium of planets in that part of your chart, then this Venus retrograde is going to be a little bit more directly influencing your personal birth chart, and that can make it more important for you. Another way to think about it is Venus retrograde really important for you is if you are in a Venus Time Lord year. So if your perfected year is Taurus or Libra, so Venus is activated or highlighted as your Time Lord this year, then any Venus retrograde is going to be a little bit more significant for you. So there's some of the ways to think about it. The other way to think about it is if you have a lot of planets in what we say Venus dignities. So if you have a lot of planets in Taurus or Libra, or maybe even Pisces, the exalted place for Venus, then anything going on with Venus is perhaps something to pay special attention to. If you don't fit that criteria, then it is something that's going on, but it may not be the most important thing in the context of the astrological cycles that are affecting your chart. So I just like to put that out there that, just because Venus is retrograde doesn't mean huge things are going to be happening for everybody. It really depends on how much that Venus retrograde is directly interacting with our personal birth chart and what kind of cycles and time periods we're in. So with all of that said, let's go a little further with looking at Venus retrograde in Capricorn. And when I was talking with a client this past week, one thing that just sort of, a light bulb moment that I had that I want to share is this idea that, yes, Venus is retrograde every 8 years in Capricorn, but the big difference between Venus retrograde December 2021, January 2022, and the one we had 8 years ago is that we've since that period, in that 8-year period, we had Saturn come through Capricorn. So the Capricorn part of your chart is in recovery, shall we say, because you may still be finding your way forward after that 3-year transit of Saturn through Capricorn. So as we are going into and encountering and experiencing and exploring the current Venus retrograde, I want to keep in mind that this is happening fairly hot on the heels of Saturn's transit through this part of your chart. So that period, 2018 to 2020, the 3 years that Saturn was basically in Capricorn, that transit of Saturn in Capricorn, maybe there's some hard-won wisdom that you've gained as a result of that. Maybe you have some new maturity, or you have a better sense of the importance or value of boundaries around the Capricorn part of your chart. Whatever that Saturn in Capricorn cycle was about for you, this Venus retrograde in Capricorn cycle wants you to go a little further with those topics. On the one hand, I think Venus retrograde in Capricorn, or even just the longer trend of Venus in Capricorn, there's another little fact to keep in the back of our minds is that because of the retrograde, Venus will actually spend 4 months in the sign of Capricorn, with the period before the retrograde, the period of the retrograde, and the period after the retrograde. So Venus is basically in Capricorn from early November 2021 right through to early March of 2022. Normally, or typically, Venus spends just 4 weeks in the sign of Capricorn. So we get this like 4 times as long influence of Venus there. And one thing that an extended influence of Venus can do is help repair. And so if you're feeling a bit battered or bruised or a little bit weary after that Saturn in Capricorn transit, this Venus in Capricorn extended cycle, which includes the retrograde but isn't just that, might be a chance to repair, restore, or to reactivate things that have been sleepy or neglected or really restricted around the Capricorn part of your chart. Now, anytime we're looking to restore something or to reactivate something, which are also great rewords to bring in for a planetary retrograde, we want to do it with some thoughtfulness. Venus in Capricorn has a real sense of clarity. And I think while that can give us some insight as to what's really going on or what's really missing around some Venus things or some Capricorn things in our charts and in our lives, it can also be a little bit uncomfortable or initially a bit deflating when we see things for what they really are. And so this early part of the Venus retrograde cycle in Capricorn is perhaps clarifying the truth of things. Venus in Capricorn is not taken in by flights and fancy. She's not falling in love with a dream. Venus in Capricorn wants substance, solidness, and reliability. And so as you're looking to reactivate or restore or even repair around this Capricorn part of your chart, you don't want to make sure you have those quality control pieces. You don't just want to reactivate willy-nilly. You want to reactivate with a plan or with this sort of specific purpose that you have in mind. So planning and preparation become part of this Venus retrograde in Capricorn. And as we get into the second half of the Venus retrograde cycle, this will be through the period in January primarily, especially the last 3 weeks of January. What we're looking to do there is to plan and prepare so that we can have long-lasting improvements about Venus things, which could be relationships, but also self-worth and self-esteem, and also the things to do with the Capricorn part of our chart. So we're wanting to plan and prepare so that we can have better results in an ongoing way around this part of our chart and this part of our life. So there's so many things going on with this Venus retrograde cycle. And because Venus is kind of symbolically in the wilderness for this almost 6-week period while she's retrograde, it's a great time to take stock and to do some deeper reflection. And helping us all out with that is this extra piece to Venus retrograde at the moment, which is this ongoing series of conjunctions between Venus and Pluto, who's also in Capricorn. And I'm sure you've probably heard a fair bit about this as well. So Venus, before, during, and then after her retrograde in Capricorn, will make 3 different conjunctions to Pluto. Now, this is happening very early in the start of the Venus retrograde process. So what that means is we're going to get 2 conjunctions from Venus to Pluto in December of 2021. And the third and final Venus-Pluto conjunction, which completes the process, or bring things to a conclusion, won't happen until early March of 2022. So Venus will be conjunct Pluto on Saturday, December 11th at 25 Capricorn while she's still direct. And then again on Saturday, December 25th, again at 25 Capricorn, this time with Venus retrograde. And so the whole month of December 2021 does have this undertone of Venus-Pluto themes. And we will see some final outcomes or resolutions to those themes, both collectively in the press, but personally in our lives in early March of 2022, when Venus is again direct and conjunct Pluto for the third and final time. So Venus conjunct Pluto adds intensity and depth to this retrograde process. The Venus conjunct Pluto sequence of conjunctions is about an examination or a deep investigation. I think it's primarily within our own hearts about what is it that we feel we have the capacity to share with others. What are the kinds of commitments or bonds or obligations or duties to other people that we want to uphold? And where are we feeling that those bonds or commitments or duties to others have started to feel too tight, and they're now feeling like they might be controlling us or they are smothering us? So there's sort of different sides to Venus Pluto. We can have, extreme loyalty, kind of steadfast devotion, but we can also have a smothering feeling or a feeling of being out of control or being powerless. So the Venus Pluto dynamic does add this power quality or highlight power dynamics in relationship. And so some of the things we're going to need to explore are, what do we feel in charge of in terms of the way we interact with other people? And where or around what in our lives, do we feel that we don't have control? Do we feel that we've given our power away to a person or to a situation, or even to something that we admire so much that we're kind of getting obsessed about it? So we're looking at those themes around power and control, and we're going to see them playing out sometimes in a dynamic between self and other, but other times within the insides of ourself, where we are sort of rendering ourselves powerless through our obsession or our compulsive tendencies or things that we might fixate on to the exclusion or detriment of other things. So questioning or even reflecting on, what do you get obsessed about and what are the outcomes of that can give you clarity about how the process works. Then you can decide if that's an outcome you're happy with, or if you'd like a different outcome. And then you might need to shift your obsessions, if you like, or change the things there where there is that compulsive quality. So the unconscious threads of power that run through important relationships and partnerships are coming to light. Both a Venus retrograde cycle as well as this series of Venus conjunct Pluto aspects can bring hidden things into the light, or bring what's been unconscious or in darkness into a place where we have clarity, or we see it, we understand it for what it is. And so the first half of the Venus retrograde cycle, which the definition of the midpoint of a retrograde cycle like this, is when the retrograde planet comes to conjunct the sun. And I'm just checking when that's going to be for Venus. It's going to be about January 9th. So from the start of the retrograde, December 19th, to the middle of the retrograde around January 9th, there's a little bit more of that sense of dealing with perhaps some of the uncomfortable components of the Venus retrograde. After January 9th, we have seen the things that we don't like. We have gained clarity about things that maybe aren't working or that we want to improve. And from January 9th to the end of the retrograde at the end of January, then we can start to feel like we want to, that's when we're in the reworking, the trying the new strategies and seeing how we go. And so there is some different tone within the Venus retrograde itself, the bit before Venus retrograde meets the sun and the bit after. And it often feels like, when Venus goes retrograde, we're like trying to find our way through a dark wood, and we don't know where we're going, and we're having to trust instincts that we don't normally use. We're having to go into a part of ourselves that we normally are disconnected from. So it feels very awkward and very uncomfortable. But when Venus retrograde gets to conjunct the sun, we sort of get to the middle of the dark wood, and somehow we have a piece of insight about, I'm in the middle of the dark wood. And if I just keep going in this direction, or if I veer a little to the left or the right, I'll get out of here eventually. So that Venus retrograde conjunction of the sun happening around 18 degrees of Capricorn around January 9th. Just double check exactly where in your where for your location. Venus, of course, goes cazimi the sun in that moment. And we do get a piece of insight or awareness that can help us navigate the remainder of the Venus retrograde. So there's lots of different pieces to this Venus retrograde, rather than just thinking about it as one long, maybe stressful time. I often think it's great to work with these cycles if we can. So with Venus retrograde and with Venus conjunct Pluto, there are pieces here about, do you feel that you've got the strength or the maturity to acknowledge an undercurrent, to speak about something that you've sensed or wondered about, but haven't maybe had the courage to express or to say out loud? Can you discuss something that you might normally keep private or that you normally would consider to be a secretive topic? So not everybody is worthy of our trust in terms of having some of these more vulnerable and intimate discussions and experiences with. But I think part of this Venus retrograde and part of Venus being with Pluto, they're all sort of tied together, even though they're two separate things. But one is happening because of the other. Venus conjunct Pluto 3 times in a short space of time is purely because Venus is going to be retrograde. So we're having to kind of, dive into the things that we've believed and to check out and see whether they're true or not, and then to explore who is worthy of our trust and our loyalty. So there's a little bit of a reassessing relationship obligations, but also like reevaluating the people that you're in relationship with, whether that's a friend, a family member, a romantic partner, or a mix of all three, just to make sure there is this quality of shared experience or a shared valuing of the encounter and the exchange, rather than you really prioritizing that person or your friendship or your relationship with them, but feeling like there isn't that sense of equal cherishing and prioritizing in return. Venus in Capricorn, because it's a sign ruled by Saturn, will often bring us into spaces where we're doing the work of partnership and perhaps not so much enjoying as much of the pleasure or joyful parts of it. And so we can also take that attitude that this is a great time to restructure or reorganize the relationship rhythms and routines in our lives, whether that's the pattern around which you catch up with family or friends, or the way you create quality time for your romantic partner. This is a chance to make a few changes that will ultimately prove to be improvements as we go forward. And so that we don't want to think that the dynamics of relating are static and unchanging, but instead to acknowledge that cycles like this indicate when a chance for a refresh and a reset is appropriate. So I'm curious to hear how this Venus retrograde in Capricorn is triggering your chart. Where is Capricorn in your personal chart? And what kinds of experiences are you noticing or processing around relationships, around trust, around loyalty, around commitment, as Venus goes through this very serious sign of Capricorn? And in many ways, she wants to get her ducks in a row. She wants to have a sense of, I know that I'm in with this person and I know that they're in with me. And if you're in a relationship with someone, friendship, family, work association, what have you, where you're not sure of their commitment or you're not sure of how they prioritize your partnership, this Venus retrograde can help you explore that or come to learn more about it. So let me know what kind of intense or probing conversations or experiences you're working through as Venus does her retrograde dance and tangles with Pluto over the next few weeks. As always, it is great to catch up and hear from you. If you love video astrology insights like this, be sure to check out my monthly astrology guide, which you can find over at my website, kellysastrology.com. I share video content there every week, week in, week out throughout the year. So there's lots to keep you going if you want more in between YouTube experiences. And if not, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel here so you always get notifications about new videos. Take care, team, and we'll talk soon.